reconvene at 1 p.m. for our next session, which will focus on the aging population. Follow after that session, we will have Dr. Namandra Bumpus, who is the Deputy Principal Commissioner at the FDA, who will close our symposium. So thank you again, and enjoy lunch, and we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. Welcome everyone from lunch. I hope you had some nutritious meals and re-energized and charged for the next session, which I'm certain that we all are aging as we speak, every minute, every second. So this is really important, and it helps us also close out our entire lifespan before we also hear from FDA afterwards. So it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Adriana Nava, who will be introducing the speakers and the panelists. So if you could please come to the table and we'll get started.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you today and continue our discussion on patient engagement with older adults and the difficulties they face with ageism. My name is Adriana Nava. I'm president of the National Association of Hispanic Nurses, and I am so pleased to be joined by my colleagues today. Today we have Dr. Adriana Perez. She is an associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. Her research focuses on the influence of multi-level factors on physical activity, cognitive health, cardiovascular health, and sleep among Spanish-speaking older adults with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. In addition, she is a practicing board-certified adult nurse practitioner providing community-based long-term care for diverse elders. Previous roles have included the chair of the expert panel on aging at the American Academy of Nursing and our policy advisor at the National Association of Hispanic Nurses for our Public Policy Committee. And she's been a congressional fellow supported by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for the Healthy Aging Program. So welcome. And next we have Dr. Hill, is the Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer for the Alzheimer's Association, providing messaging and mobilization efforts addressing systemic health inequities in treatment, clinical trials, and research. He has held various conferences and initiatives to examine and address disparities in dementia prevention, diagnosis, and treatment. Dr. Hill has also developed collaborations with over 30 national partners to reach previously underserved communities and is a champion for more diverse, representative perspectives to address disparities and pursue equity in dementia science. He is also a member of NHG's Special Committee on Health Equity. So I'm happy to be joining you today. And I just want to make sure this is on. Okay, great. So I'm really happy to be here today with both of you, just because we have a longstanding relationship with the National Association of Hispanic Nurses, as well as with researchers, ensuring that we're able to, I apologize, multitasking here. We're able to reach a broad range of communities, especially of older adults. So I just want each of you to share how you've gotten involved in research and caring for older adults.
Is this on? Can you guys hear me? Okay, perfect. So I have been a nurse and a nurse practitioner for almost 20 years. And immediately my experience both as a student and as a nurse really was drawn to older adults. I think really it's because of, in our culture, older adults are revered, they are honored, and they are really the sort of the treasure of the family. So I've always gravitated towards older people as a population that I think as a nurse I can serve best. And then of course, being bilingual, bicultural, most of my clinical experience and my research has focused on addressing the needs of older Latinos, people that are non-English speaking, immigrants, and just people that are historically marginalized, which again, this is a population that has many needs, but also I think offers us a great opportunity in the healthcare field to think about ways to be creative. They are a population that keep you humble and always striving to be better. So.
Oh yes, and it's just great to be here with both Adrianas and And Dr. Perez and I, go way back.
Yeah, we told him that would never happen again. This is only once in a lifetime.
Two Adrianas, I'll tell you, yeah. Yeah, very similar. My lived experience, having grown up in a really primarily segregated community in Atlanta, Georgia, Black African American, and just, recognizing a lack of, resources, really got me interested in public health, and had a chance to be a part of the first class of the Masters in Public Health program at Morehouse School of Medicine, which is a HBCU in Atlanta, and did some community work. I come at this from, I come to research, from a community engagement, passion, and wanting to evaluate programs or kind of sharpen my skills, and did some doctoral training at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, really because of a affirmative action, kind of equity, highlight, in that time where the Kellogg Foundation was funding underrepresented students, pre-doctoral fellowships to get more representation in the public health field, and I got caught up in that great opportunity, and had a chance to work with David Williams when I was there, preeminent health disparity scholar, James Jackson, Woody Neighbors, all these people that were thinking critically about the health of Black African Americans, and then infusing that with my interest in community engagement. Landed a job at NIH at the National Institute, or the National Center on Minority Health and Health Disparities at the time, and I think that's where I first met Dr. Perez, where we were both new. I was a new project officer, she was a new grantee. Moved over to Child Health and Human Development.
I was a student. So
He was a student. He was a student.
He was
Okay.
much older. I'm just kidding.
I thought it was the other way around. No. So, and then, when I was at Michigan, I had a chance to work with Arlene Geronimus, and she had this weathering concept where at the time I didn't really get it. She taught this class, and we played Monopoly. And various players had different amounts of money, and the people who had, reduced wages could never catch up, and the gap widened, at every game, in this class, and so that was intriguing to me. So aging for me is kind of the life course and the experiences and stressors, opportunities that people have, and the determinants over the life course that put people at risk in midlife and then later stages, and so, took that interest to the National Institute on Aging, where I led the Office of Special Populations, and did some work there, and was recruited to continue this work at the association. I joined the association as a scientific engagement specialist, and then the DEI, position became available. And, I'm not a human resources guy. I'm a community and a researcher. But, with our 75 chapters in cities all around the country, I thought it was just an excellent opportunity to get resources to underserved communities in ways that could be effective. The opportunity was there. We've got a long way to go. But, with that kind of infrastructure, it really offers an opportunity to impact the aging population as it pertains to dementia. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I love how you said that we have to look at health across the lifespan, and there's times where we need to have a targeted approach in looking at specific populations. Right. And I know some of the work that I do at the National Committee for Quality Assurance, we do focus on older adults and looking at social determinants of health and looking at their unaddressed needs. And we know that there's structural barriers that prohibit individuals from living their best life. And I know you two came together on a publication looking at structural barriers. And if you could talk a little bit about what the research was about, what your findings were as it pertained to the population of older adults.
Yes, sure. I'm so proud of that paper because it exemplifies this interdisciplinary collaborative work that we've done with Dr. Hill at the Alzheimer's Association, with the National Association of Hispanic Nurses, and with colleagues across the country at different academic institutions. to really focus on the barriers for inclusion of older Latinos into clinical trials. And so we looked at all of the published literature. There have been over 70,000 clinical trials that have focused on neurological disorders, in particular Alzheimer's disease, and thousands and thousands of patients. And the patients that should be included, the ones that suffer more disproportionately from Alzheimer's disease, are not included. These are important trials that will really drive what I do as a clinician, as a primary care provider. These are the guidelines that I'm going to receive for practice that don't include the majority of the patients that I serve in North Philly. So out of these thousands of trials, less than 2% of participants are Black African American. And similarly for Latinos, less than 5% are Hispanic, Latinx people that have been part of these trials. And so, we have this sense of urgency that things need to change. And so that paper looks at all the levels. At the micro level, we looked at things like the individual and family, things that we should be paying attention to, of course, things like language, culture, those are important. At the second level, at the meso level, we're looking at the way clinical trials are designed, the kind of PIs, principal investigators, and the clinical trial staff that work in these trials. Are they bilingual, bicultural? Do they understand both the challenges that a person, potential research participant, can have, as well as an opportunity, to engage that person? The inclusion criteria and how trials are designed. Most clinical trials require the person to be English proficient. And there's no scientific basis for that requirement. It's because we don't have the staff, or, really now the issue of we don't have instruments translated in Spanish doesn't really count, because most everything is already translated. So there is a challenge with having clinical neurologists, people that are trained to do these tests. It is important for them to be bilingual, and so that is an important issue, but we can't continue to just exclude patients that would benefit so much from these clinical trials. And then at the macro level, we were just talking about policies and funding, where decisions are made. Are those leaders, are they representative of the people that we're trying to include? And often they're not. The paper cites statistics at the NIH of how little representation there is, especially as you continue to go up the ladder, at NIH, of leaders there that make decisions about funding, that make decisions about the kinds of problems that we are studying. So more and more clinical trials focus on treatment, medications. But if we really focus on what's important to people, especially older people, you're going to look at social determinants of health. Those are the things that really matter to people, their neighborhood where they live, their access to transportation, their access to healthcare services and other social services. Yeah. So we really take a comprehensive look at all of the barriers and determine that we need to continue to have sort of this all hands on deck approach. We need to look at all of those, we need to pay attention to all of those, but really ensure that we are investing in ensuring that we have both a clinical workforce and a research workforce that is representative. And so that's why I'm so proud again of the partnership that we have at the National Association of Hispanic Nurses. I became a nurse 20 years ago. Back then the statistics were the same. Less than 5% of nurses were Hispanic Latino, and that number hasn't changed. It has not kept up with the growth of the Hispanic Latino population in the country. So so it's a great paper, and thank you for for bringing that up. And I know that you've done, Dr. Hill, a lot of work, especially when I think about the leadership at NIH. I always remember you, back then, because it was rare for me to see a person of color in a leadership position, and so it was so helpful to have you at the NIA in the position you had as a leader, because then it inspires many of us to think, what's possible.
It was a great opportunity, and these frameworks, I tell you, we created one, the National Institute on Aging's Health Disparities Research Framework, and so this particular paper on Hispanic Latino representation, really links to some work that, we, kind of did together previously, Dr. Aranda, and, frameworks don't solve the problem, but they allow you to see, points of malleable intervention, which I think is critical for the field, right? And, it kind of links back to, again, my time at Michigan, studying and coming across the Lincoln-Phelan paper, Fundamental Causes, I think, of Disparities, or the name of it. I'll never forget it because it outlined those factors that were, proximate and distal, and some of the work that we do in communities certainly is to give people resources, information, and awareness. But the intervention point, may be very, many phases upstream, influencing policy or increasing the numbers of, health professionals that are in a community that represent the population, is a critical need. And so I was really excited about, that paper in outlining macro determinants here, because in this space of this science of recruitment or representation in clinical trials, it's easy to blame the victim, and that links to that goes to the Lincoln-Phelan paper of saying, hey, people don't adhere to a certain lifestyle, they get a certain result, right? Well, the factors are more complex than contextual than that. I think representation in trials is the same way. Dr. Perez mentioned the eligibility criteria, which screen many people out because they may have pre-existing condition like diabetes or have unfortunately suffered a stroke, right? And so that's one part of it. Others is just not even being asked to participate. Many people say, no one has ever knocked on my door to ask me to participate in a trial or approached me in a way that was culturally responsive, which means that you heard about the trial from, Dr. Nava, who is the president of the, National Association of Hispanic Nurses, right? A trusted organization in these communities. And so, we've got a lot of work to do in intervening at the right places, and not only saying to individuals, we've got to raise awareness, people have to trust. Not everyone's thinking of the Tuskegee syphilis study and the Henrietta Lacks situation in Baltimore. Some people are, right? But some people are saying, I'd like to participate, but I'd like to know that my participation is protected and valued, and that I would receive, that there's a benefit, for me and my community. And so just excited to, just really excited about how we laid that out, and hopeful that patient advocates, researchers, others, can really take that and, to say to leaders in pharma or at NIH that there needs to be more accountability to some of these fundamental factors, one of which I'll end here is just, considering representation as a criteria for treatment approval. I mean, we don't want to slow the science down, but it has to be a strong criteria for how these treatments are approved if there is just such a severe lack of representation in the trials.
And what I really like to highlight here is like the relationship that you two have had over time and from different sectors, and being able to work together with the National Association of Hispanic Nurses. And for those who are not aware, we're a national organization. We have 24 states that are represented throughout the country with 40 chapters. And our members are nurses or individuals who are interested in a career in nursing. And we hope to develop or further develop the talent pipeline in order for them to become researchers, to become experts in their field, leaders throughout their institutions. So this partnership has really, maintained over years and different presidents that were part of the organization. And I just wanted to spend a little bit of time acknowledging the importance of organizations such as that are nonprofits, are in the community doing the work to advance equity, oftentimes need additional resources and support. And this partnership has been, over time, been able to reach many, many nurses who are now learning more about older adults and issues within the older adult community, but also our impact in going out in health fairs and educating on the impact of Alzheimer's disease, for example. So do you have any recommendations for others, researchers or experts in the field, how they can engage nonprofits that are in the, work in the community to build those partnerships and kind of like the fundamental important keys that they need to consider?
Yes, I want to let you take, because I think you have such a great skill in developing coalitions and bringing people to the table. But I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the leadership at NAN and Dr. Nava. I mean, this is an organization that what we do is mentor students, provide scholarships, and nurses are the #1 trusted profession in the country, and we've been the #1 trusted profession. I think it's interesting, even beyond the clergy, beyond priests, like nurses are trusted. But are we supported in terms of, funding? When I look at what we receive in terms of support from organizations, I think there could be more. There really could be more, because we need more of us. And nurses that are engaged in the kind of work that we've done, they do it above and beyond their normal work hours. They work night shifts or they work day shift, they work 12 hours. They'll get on a call after a 12-hour shift to plan an event. And so that's an important consideration when engaging nurses in general, but especially, the nurses of the National Association of Hispanic Nurses, because they are involved and they're so passionate about so many of the things that they do, clinically, but also in their community. And that's why the work that we've done with the Alzheimer's Association made sense. Because when we ask people in focus groups, people that might be at risk for Alzheimer's disease or cognitive health impairment, when we ask them, what would help them really take interest in participating in research, and they talked about where they would get that information from. It would be important if that person was trusted. And so, of course, it made sense. And the Alzheimer's Association also has chapters across the country in every state. So we thought the infrastructure is there, and we know the desire and the passion is there, and obviously the skill in both organizations. But I think that relationships really matter. I've known Omar, Dr. Contreras, for a long time, and I came to this conference because that relationship is important to me. And these relationships are important to foster, and that's what I've learned from older people, that it is about relationships, and it is about really feeling like they can trust you in committing to being part of something for 3 or 4 years. I mean, these clinical trials last a long time. So when, think about when somebody asks you to do something, how long is it going to take me to do this? That's the kind of commitment we're asking of older people, and so the relationship is going to be important.
Yeah, that's right, Dr. Perez. I tell you, in addition to participating in clinical trials, and we at the Alzheimer's Association, 75 chapters around the country, working in communities to get free resources to people about Alzheimer's and dementia, support for caregivers, all sorts of things that we give for free. And we have a disparity in who our constituents are for free resources, right? And so that really doubles down on this concept of trust, and knowing that people have to trust, your organization, and the organization has to present itself as being trustworthy, which, takes time. I always say it's hard to quantify trust. You can't just send a check to say we work together and, put a logo on a slide and we're partners. But the work is the activation. And sometimes that takes, I'll use this phrase, restorative justice, not to make this all academic, but just listening to people and understanding what went wrong. You've not been in this community, so it's going to take some time, for us to believe that you'll be here and that you'll stay, and we've done that with none. We're working with the African Methodist Episcopal Church, largest black church in the country, and they had some criticisms that we had to really listen to. Fraternities and sororities, all sorts of organizations that we're partnering with, where we're just over a couple years time getting to the point where we can link our chapters with their chapters. And it's still not a utopia, because we're seeing places all over the country where, I'll say it, you can't even say the 3 letters DEI. It's against the law, for in the state, but not for our organization. So it's explaining what health equity is, what we're trying to accomplish, which in my mind is getting people resources in the ways that they can best receive them in their language, in partnership with an organization that they trust, in a format that, will be effective. We partner with Garrett Davis Productions to create a stage play. Now I never thought in all of my training and work that I would, help develop a stage play, but it's been a lot of fun and effective. We've gotten thousands of people per city to come out and hear information through an edutainment lens, where, people shed a tear and they laugh, they're informed about Alzheimer's and the Alzheimer's Association. And I believe that people walk away better informed from that format and through that partnership, and so I think that we're in a technology age. There's so much that we're gonna use AI for, and I'm all for it. But I still think that people need to trust. We need to be in community, talking with people, making partnerships with organizations that allow us to pursue equity, not only for KPIs and organizational outcomes, but for public health and the people who need to receive the resources. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. And I know we've spoken a little bit about some of the barriers and challenges to addressing equity for older adults. And I just wanted to hear, what are some successes that you've seen? And they may be incremental, but some things that you want to highlight that are positives for the older adult population.
Yes, so I currently have a study now. It's called Tiempo Juntos por Nuestra Salud, Time Together for Our Health. It's an exercise clinical trial that looks at exercise as a non-pharmacologic therapy to improving or at least maintaining, memory health, also to maintaining or improving cardiovascular health, as well as sleep. And sleep is included in the study because the patients that I serve in North Philly would always tell me, one of the top complaints, coming into to the clinic was sleep. I can't sleep, or I wake up at night. And so that really caused me to think more about sleep and to, again, do something that matters to the community and the patients. And so I would say that an example of something that's successful, I think of that because I think Tiempo Juntos includes outcomes that are important, again, to the community, not just to the older people, but also to the organizations that are partnering with us in this study. When I think about the paper and all the different levels of barriers that could, prevent an older Latino from participating, we've taken a look at that. Our staff, our clinical team is diverse subculturally for Latinos. I'm from Arizona, and so my research there was mostly with older Mexican-American people. Here, it's very diverse. The majority of Latinos in North Philly are Puerto Rican, but also there's an increasing number of people from the Dominican Republic, Cuban people, people from Colombia. So I am learning a lot about, sort of how you design clinical trials within a community to really address the context and what's important in that community. It looks different than the exercise trial that I ran in Phoenix. It looked, for many reasons, but one thing that I think has helped a lot is the diversity of our staff. Because of the staff, we caught early on that some of the memory screenings were not capturing the linguistic differences in Latinos. So for example, plátano, we use plátano in Spanish. Mexican people, we eat plátanos as a fruit. But in some countries, like the Dominican Republic, they eat a guineo, which is also a banana, which looks like a plátano, but it's a vegetable. And why that's important is because there is a question on a memory screen that asks the person to list all the vegetables they can in 1 minute. And so you might mark the person wrong if they said a banana, because you'd say, no, that's a fruit, they're wrong. But we saw that, a pattern of that, and so our staff said, no, in our country we eat this like a vegetable, so they're not wrong, So that's what I think makes it so important that you have people that really understand, and that not just linguistically but culturally, the community where you are working. And at a very sort of structure, university level, the barriers that we knew early on would prevent people from participating is asking for Social Security numbers. They get $50. Like, you do not need a Social Security number for $50. It is a requirement of the university to capture, everyone that you're giving money to, but it really is not necessary. And so we addressed that through IRB, through the Institutional Review Board early on, and said, this is a population that is at risk, and we do need to protect their privacy and ensure we're also, meeting their needs. So we've, from the very beginning, from conceptualizing this study, the community was part of what the study would look like, but also throughout thinking about, from the staff, from, of course, language and culture, but also even at the academic level and at the community level, getting people to where they need to be through transportation. So I think it's just one example of thinking about this sort of intersectionality lens too, of how maybe some women would be comfortable talking about topics, but if we have men involved, we need to think about how this conversation should look. So a lot of thought, but I think that level of commitment and time investment really yields positive results. We exceeded recruitment by 5 months. We over-recruited because people were so interested in joining the study. So I think when you do take that kind of time and invest in these procedures, you can have very positive results.
Yeah, oh, that's good. Thanks for that, Dr. Perez. I tell you, I think about our paper in the micro, meso, and macro, and micro level. Certainly, what I mentioned with our play, Unforgettable. Check it out, unforgettableplay.com. Touring around the country, just a great way to get caregivers and people that are affected by Alzheimer's and dementia out, community out, to hear about the Alzheimer's Association. Because again, we're trying to get our free resources to all communities, particularly those that are disproportionately affected and underserved, right? And so finding ways to do that. Certainly adding our partners. We made these partners, these national partnerships that have many chapters in the same places as our chapters. So getting our partners to serve on our chapter boards. Please go back and after you finish this session, Google us, alz.org, to see if a chapter is close to you, and you can volunteer on one of our boards. This just helps us strategize and find ways to get our resources to communities right in your area. So being intentional about representation, not just racial, ethnic, that's very important, but also age, and also where people live and the type of disciplines that they come from, because I believe it's going to be a interdisciplinary mix of people that improve the representation or address the disparities that we see in Alzheimer's and dementia. So at a micro level, that's been very productive for us. Macro, we know that this is the golden age of Alzheimer's research. In the last 10 years, there have been over 50 Alzheimer's disease research centers that are funded by the National Institute on Aging, where I previously worked, all over the country, working in academic institutions, conducting studies, conducting clinical trials. And so we brought all of our partners together, including NON, to advocate for the ENACT Act, and that's equity in neuroscience, Clinical Trials
Yeah.
Act, but essentially it was, giving researchers at these ADRCs, these research centers, resources to do more community engagement, all the stuff that we've been talking about for better recruitment, better representation, because as a project officer at NIH, when researchers, oftentimes didn't meet their recruitment goals, their rationale was that we don't have the expertise or the money to do it the right way. We can't hire anyone to go out in the community and, hey, I'm a neuroscientist. I don't know how to do community engagement. So, these resources allow for better innovation, but also accountability, right? Because when the government, the NIH provides resources in a grant, there needs to be some reporting on how those resources were spent and what the outcomes were. And so we're hoping over time, that we'll get, better representation from NIA-funded grants in terms of representation, but that all came from organizing our partners to advocate for this ENACT Act that was eventually included in the federal budget last year, and that's that the NIA is utilizing for better representation. And so, again, it's coalition building, it's being intentional, it's holding people and organizations accountable, tracking results, and then explaining again what we're doing. I oftentimes repeat myself over and over. This is what diversity is. This is how it links to inclusion. And this is why equity is important. And being sure that we all level set and understand what we're trying to accomplish for the Alzheimer's Association. Yeah.
No, and that's true. Like even trying to attack health equity as a topic, it's so much there to unpack. And I know from a quality standpoint, we've been looking at the intersection of race and ethnicity with sexual orientation and gender identity and the different ways that individuals identify themselves. And I'm just curious, in what ways have your organizations or your research been able to navigate the complexity of addressing equity, and how do you ensure that voices are included from groups that are not usually represented in data sets or as well as in other public areas?
I've been going first the whole time. I think you should go first. No, I wanted to go first because I feel like, as an organization, I feel like the Alzheimer's Association does get this and does this well. And I think you've heard some examples of bringing people to the table. But even as an individual, I'm my own institution. I'm my own sort of growing my own work and my own team. So even as a nurse and as an individual provider or an individual researcher, I think there is a lot that we can do to make sure that we are thinking of the people that usually are marginalized in these conversations. So what I learned, through my education, I think seeing people that do this, that not only say this, but really do this, helped me. So I would never go into a community and propose to do a study without knowing that community, without knowing what's important. Like I said, I became interested in sleep because the patients that I serve, that's like one of the number one causes, complaints of health complaints that they come in with. And so that kind of guides me to making sure that I'm, first of all, looking at problems that are important to this population. When I think about women, and what women have experienced in terms of sexism, we have opportunities for women, the older women in the study, to talk about things in a study group that they feel comfortable talking about. And so we always have these pre-meeting and post-meeting, how did things go, involving the actual participants to give us feedback in real time. So not waiting, to the end to, get an evaluation, but we do this, iteratively. And I think, because I'm focused on older adults, I've always thought of how would this benefit an older person, or what do I need to think about if the person uses a cane to walk or uses a walker? How is the environment such that it would promote physical activity regardless of ability or disability? And then, of course, in terms of language and immigration status, I make sure that nobody feels uncomfortable participating because they're afraid of, somebody having access to their information. That I saw a lot more so in Arizona when I was doing research there. People did not want anything to do with anything that was funded by the federal government. So you have to think about, what they might feel like giving that information, and is it necessary? So I think the intersectionality lens is an approach that causes us to think at the very beginning, how might this requirement, how might this policy affect, younger people, older people, the women, the old, the person that doesn't speak English? How might this, will this leave anyone out? And again, when it comes to clinical trials, it does, the way they are conducted now, they leave a lot of people out that, again, could truly stand to benefit from the research.
Yeah, this is a tough one, I tell you, because I think the next frontier in disparities research or equity research is prioritizing intersectionality. People are more than their category on the census, right? And so it's easy for an organization to just kind of lay back and say, we prioritize these groups because the federal government says so. But to go deeper, to be effective is to understand that people are, more than one life domain. Right. If we want to be effective in my case, getting our resources to people in ways that they will actually, utilize it. And so, we're grappling with this right now, and I don't have a best case scenario other than acknowledging and communicating this in my role to the leadership of the organization, which, our CEO, Dr. Joanne Pike, she's interested in knowing how best to serve, people that, quite frankly, we haven't reached, and what are the ways to do that. And so, communicating that this is the next frontier, understanding the influence of culture and religion that is, sometimes over and beyond the racial ethnic categories in the census, and that are, very important. We're talking right now internally. Our staff is a community of people dedicated to our mission, but it's a community of people who want, their, cultural, heritage to be celebrated. They want to be acknowledged. And, we're deciding how and who and when, for our own internal community, and I think that lends itself to a, intersectionality lens, that we're more than just, racial ethnic categories in a census. And so, to be continued, because we're grappling with that, and that's the work of the DEI guy, in addition to working in communities, it's, how do we acknowledge the great cultural strengths that are within our own organization among our staff, and we want to do that, in the right ways. And so I'll keep you posted on that. Dr.
No, and that's a great point, because even within us being a predominantly Latino-serving organization, we still grapple with how do we acknowledge everyone's uniqueness that they bring to the greater Latino community. So definitely kudos for continuing that work. So I do want to turn to the audience, and if there's any questions, we're happy to take them. There's microphones on either side. Hello. And thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all for your amazing chat with us here. One of my areas that I'm really just trying to get my mind around is just having a better understanding of what trust building and what good examples of trust building looks like. I really appreciated, Dr. Perez, your example of, breaking it down by the subculture, making sure that we are addressing privacy challenges when doing the clinical trial recruitment. But a big challenge that a lot of industry partners have is that piece. It's like, okay, yes, we want to come to the community, but then are we the people that need, that can be the face of building that trust? So what are some great examples of trust building on a community and local level?
Thank you for that question. Our paper also cites some of the most common values, at least for Latinos, that have been documented in the literature for decades. So things like confianza, trust, personalismo, do I feel comfortable talking to you, not just are you friendly, but are you approaching me with questions in a way that makes me comfortable, and things like familismo. Most studies require a person to have a caregiver or a person with them that will be part of the study for the 3 or 4 years that they're in the study. And so that looks different to Latino families because we don't only have one person, we have a couple of people. And so I've said over and over, why does it just need to be the one person? Well, it's because that's convenient for the clinical trial staff to have just the one person. But that's just not how we operate as a family unit. There usually are 1 or 2 people, there are usually 2 or more people helping to take care of that person if they need care. And it's a shared responsibility, usually among the young people in the family. So there's no reason to have to do things that way. I would say think about the procedures you have in place and how that might exclude certain people. And so just one thing that I feel like is a great example, and maybe you could all relate to this. If I ask you to sit in an interview with me and I say at the end of the interview you're going to get $50 for participating in a form of a Visa card, and you participate, you take your hour, and at the end I give you this card and it doesn't work, and you're trying to reach me and now you can't reach me anymore, and now you have to go through multiple people to get a hold of me to find out what happened to your money. And so to some people that, oh, well, it's just, they'll get it. Let's just tell her that next week we'll add it to the card. There are so many things for a person just to get their end, of the agreement. And so for me, trust is that what you said was going to happen happens. And if you show me once that, you've broken your end of this agreement, then I can't trust you anymore. I mean, that's what trust is that we know you tell me you're going to do something and you do it, and so people that are now in clinical trials, we've interviewed many that have participated, and they say they never called me back, or I try to call them, they never respond, or it's always someone else, or the card they gave me doesn't even work. I tried to use it, they told me it has no money, and so elevating the issues that are important to the participants is so critical, so I make sure as the PI that every participant is able to reach me for any emergency or anything that they might need, and so that takes a lot of time for me. So as an academic, my university gives me an X% of time to spend in research, and so all these things are related, right? So again, I think for a person, for any one of us to feel like who you are working with is trustworthy, that person has to be not just credible, but also meet their end of the agreement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we did a special report, Race, Ethnicity, and Alzheimer's in America in 2021. You can find it at alz.org. Great report, first of its kind, nationally representative responses from all racial ethnic groups. And we found that Black African Americans, Hispanic Latinos reported perceptions and experiences of discrimination in the dementia care system, right? Which, was quite eye-opening, at the time. And the number one reason for their perceptions or experiences of discrimination was that they felt like they weren't being heard, right? So could you imagine getting to a place of wanting to participate in a trial or getting to see a gerontologist, dementia care specialist, and you feel like they're not even listening to you, right? And so, the inverse of that is, showing humility. I think taking the time to listen, again, mapping back to what I said about developing partnerships, listening to what has gone wrong in the past, or, listening to people's symptoms and the ideas that they have, I think are so important, right? So that data, I think, is important for understanding, some of these trust issues in the dementia space. We're organizing our partners locally in our chapters. We're putting together coalitions of consortiums of partners, and we're calling this project Brain Trust. right? And because we think that some of the factors that lend to a lack of representation could differ in places like Chicago or Houston or Los Angeles. And so if our partners come together, we hold a series of community listening sessions, and then we go from the place of telling people, hey, participate in a trial, now go find one, or we've got an app, driving people to an app. My mom is 75 years old. She's not gonna participate in a trial from an app. She needs to know that someone is following her participation, and she needs to hear it from people in her community. And so the hope is that we're going to connect people in communities that are underrepresented to trials that are currently recruiting in those areas, and that our consortium will help us do that. And our partners like NON and the National Hispanic Medical Association and National Black Nurses Association will all come together to help us drive people to the trials, right? And so, intention at the local level, I think, is another way to respond to this lack of trust, being sure that people see folks that represent them from their community so that their participation will be protected. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Perez, Dr. Hill, thank you so much.
We
have one more. Do I have time? No, sorry. If we can come after, we'll be happy to take your questions. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Nava.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Nova. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and I am honored to introduce our next speaker. And thank you, Dr. Nava, for moderating the session. So, I am deeply humble and excited to introduce Dr. Nemanja Bumpus. Dr. Bumpus is a Principal Deputy Commissioner at the Food and Drug Administration. And in her role, Dr. Bumpus has advanced the organization through valuable public health initiatives and strengthening the Office of Regulatory Affairs. She is a champion of plain language and advocate for truth-telling in public health and a formidable scientist. Her research has focused on drug metabolism, pharmacogenetics, bioanalytical chemistry, and infectious disease pharmacology, and she currently serves as the president of the American Society for Pharmacology and Experimental Therapeutics. In addition to her many other awards and honors for her work, also in pharmacology and xenobiotics. So Dr. Bumpus, it is an honor to introduce you, and please, thank you.
This goes forward. All right. All right, thanks everybody. It's good to be here. So, I'm going to be talking a bit about some of our work at FDA in the context of, let's just go to my presentation, in the context of advancing health equity, some of our work in the pediatric space, some of our work in the context of older adults. But to set the stage for that, and that work that we're doing, I'll talk primarily about the Office of the Commissioner at FDA. As mentioned, I'm the Principal Deputy Commissioner. I want to give a foundation of a little bit of the science, the biological science, the pharmacology that I think is important in informing why we need clinical trial diversity and why it's really important in advancing health equity. So there certainly is, of course, a moral imperative. But in addition, there are some really fundamental reasons why science itself and our understanding of basic biology is even held back when we don't have clinical trial diversity. So I want to talk about that a bit. So I'll talk about some of those scientific considerations. So if we're thinking about a medicine, say a drug, there are things that happen to it once we take that medicine, say we swallow it, say it's an oral drug. And many of those things that happen to it can be sensitive to certain things about us. And we'll talk a little bit more about why, but age, developmental stage, so children, our diet, various aspects. And that's because these things that happen to the medicine, we can divide kind of into two ways, divide pharmacology into two ways. Pharmacology is the biology of medicines. So pharmacodynamics is really what the drug does to the body, so how it acts, what we need it to do, the receptor it binds to, its mechanism of action. But you can imagine that can be different between people potentially, right? Genetics, for instance. Then there's also pharmacokinetics, which is how our bodies process that medicine. So we take it, we actually recognize it as something foreign, and there are things our body starts to do to clear it out, essentially. So we process it, and that's pharmacokinetics, how it moves through, and part of that includes processing. So that difference in, say, how a drug can move through our body, how we process it, can underlie inter-individual differences between people. So I want to say, this is definitely really dependent on the individual medicine. Certain medicines won't be very sensitive to these differences, some will be sensitive. So this is really just a framing of the things we think about and the things that make it important to really have this diversity in clinical trials. So that pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, where they come together is ensuring that drug safety and efficacy, they impact that. How we process it, how it moves through our body, what it's doing when it's there, that's the safety and efficacy. So these are really the cornerstones of drug action. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about pharmacokinetics because that's a stage that can be very sensitive to those inter-individual differences. So for instance, you might see certain medicines will say, don't take this with grapefruit juice, and that's because grapefruit juice can impact this process of pharmacokinetics. Drugs can impact each other, and largely that can be through these interactions at the pharmacokinetic phase. So you can imagine when we're talking about clinical trial diversity, trying to understand people's lifestyles, trying to understand changes that happen across the lifespan, each of these steps can be sensitive to that. So we need to consider that, and to understand the range of response to a medicine, diversity for that reason is important. So there's absorption. So again, if we're talking about something oral, you swallow it, it needs to be absorbed into your body, into your GI tract, so we have absorption. Distribution, where it goes, how it gets where it needs to go. If it needs to act in the brain, distributing to the brain, for instance, where it goes in your body. Now, metabolism is not metabolism that we think of in the context of food, for instance. We talk about our metabolism as far as our physiology. It's actually an active process where your body can change and try to get rid of a medicine. And that's very sensitive to differences between people with genetics and other things, and an excretion, clearing it from our bodies. So we're going to focus on, again, as I mentioned, some of the work in FDA around pediatrics and older adults, but I feel like I'd be remiss if we didn't touch a little bit on pharmacogenetics, because genetic differences are part of the reason that clinical trial diversity is so important. Genetic differences between people can have an impact on that processing, that metabolism, for instance, of drugs. And so because of that, if we're only looking in a small subset of the population, we're not understanding the potential range of impact of individual genetics on a drug's action or its ability to work. And any of this, I'm saying drug, it could also be a chemical, it could be something else, just simplifying. You could think chemicals go through these same processes when we're exposed to them. So in order to really be able to predict outcomes, whether it's safety or efficacy, it's important to understand all of those steps we talked about, and again, how something like, for instance, genetics could mediate that difference. And so genetics, I talked about, can impact that processing, but also even the dynamics, the action. So the thing the drug needs to do, maybe there could be a difference in its target between people. So we need to analyze it at every step. So work has been done in that space, but this has to then expand to even thinking about things like lifespan, how age impacts each of these steps as well. And that's something that's being done increasingly, but that certainly we need more work and attention to. So when I'm thinking about development and thinking about neonates, pediatric populations, older adults, one of the key phases that there can be a difference, as I mentioned, in that drug processing, drug metabolism. So I just want to show you why that is. So this is a diagram of what happens. Basically, if you take a medicine orally, it's absorbed, it goes into your body, your stomach, your GI tract. It moves through your body, through the liver, through the intestine. It gets out of the liver, goes into your blood, and that's where it can circulate in your body and do its thing. It usually will be removed from your body in your kidneys, say your urine. The liver has an abundance of proteins called drug metabolizing enzymes, drug metabolizing proteins that act on drugs. They change drugs. So for instance, there are certain drugs that are associated with toxicity. And oftentimes that toxicity is from a product of the drug that's made by drug metabolism. It's not the drug itself. It can be a metabolite, a product. So this process is important to understand. With age, our blood flow changes. Because your blood flow changes, that changes the rate of metabolism. Neonates have different proteins for drug metabolism than we do as adults. So a neonate would then process something differently than we do. So all of this is really foundational in establishing why we need to think about that diversity. Genetics impacts this. Genetics impacts what you might have in your liver versus me. And oftentimes those genetic differences can be prevalent in certain geographic regions of ancestry. So all of this really is the rationale, a scientific rationale for why we need clinical trial diversity. So just to show you an in-depth blowout. So if you take the liver, you blow up a cell, you've got a hepatocyte. That's the major cell of the liver, the primary cell of the liver. And so all I'm trying to show you here is that a drug moving through that cell can be changed by these enzymes into something else. It could become something toxic potentially. Usually it is something that's not safe, that's not toxic, it's safe. It's actually cleared from your body. It's more water soluble, it's cleared from your body. So metabolism's trying to get rid of things. As I mentioned, it does with chemicals too. But differences in that rate, again, can impact how we each respond. And so those proteins I told you about are called cytochromes P450, and they're in the liver. So that process of drug metabolism may be a little more science than we bargained for, but the reason it's important and the reason I wanted to introduce it is because it is sensitive to so many of the things that we've been talking about throughout the course. So when we're talking about various populations, we're talking about aging, each of those things impacts this process. So it means, as I mentioned, we're talking about it from a patient access standpoint that is key and important. But there's a basic understanding of science and biology that will be advanced when we have this type of diversity and we have equity. So drug metabolism can be impacted by food effects. I talked about grapefruit juice, other things. Drug interactions, so drugs people are taking at the same time. So things that you're taking at the same time can interact potentially and impact each other. So we hear about some of the work we do that this is a concern, specifically for older adults. They think about that. Well, there is a science there, and we actually can explain to them which medicines are most likely to interact with others and which medicines won't based on that science. Communicating that to them can potentially lower some of the concerns that they have about participation. So there's really value in understanding the pharmacology and communicating that to people when they're potentially participating in a trial. Disease state, so for instance, if someone has a liver disease, they may have very different pharmacokinetics. Their liver's not working the same way. Age, as I mentioned, neonates have some drug metabolizing proteins that we don't have. So it's different, and we don't know as much about neonates, so it can be harder to predict. But it lends an importance to thinking about the lifespan and the development of this process. There are differences, certainly, in males and females, in patterns of expression. Pregnancy has been shown to change patterns of expression in blood flow. Older adults, differences in blood flow and genetic variation. So all of these are foundational reasons for this difference, and I think things that we can communicate to people to really give them that foundation for why this work's important and to help think through and mitigate some of the concerns that they might have. So with that kind of perspective that I always keep, this guiding principle that if we really want to understand science and biology and humans and the range of responses, we need to think about everybody. And the reason for that, many of the things I just showed. So how do we do that structurally? So there are a couple of things, and FDA, we have guidance about these things and many things you can find on our website. I'll just talk through a few that you may not be as familiar with. So one thing, of course, is thinking about study design. So we have, for instance, recommendations and ways that we try to have people think about exclusion criteria. Is it absolutely necessary to exclude certain populations from a study? Say it's people with a certain comorbidity. Do we have a scientific rationale for thinking that that would impact the endpoints of the study that we're doing? Some of that comes to understanding those processes we were talking about earlier. Is another medicine that they would take going to have an impact? Is there potential impact just because of their physiology? So having a scientific basis for exclusion criteria instead of some of them that are just traditional and people always include them, but really thinking about why we need those exclusion criteria. Because if we do that, we have the opportunity to include more people, right? Infrastructure. So one thing certainly that I'm sure has come up here is bringing trials to the people, whether it's making more opportunities for in-home visits, for telehealth, for ensuring that we have diversity as far as the sites where these studies are being performed. Those things are all important. And along with that, I always say the workforce as well. So we have to think about the workforce, and that's across the range. So of course, that's thinking about the medical professionals, the healthcare, public health professionals who are doing the studies. We want to make sure that there's cultural concordance with the patient populations, of course. But even on the science end, the basic translational science end, we're thinking about what are the types of drugs we're going to develop, what are the potential targets. The diversity there is important because it really gives an opportunity to start to think about the totality of these issues we should think about. Could genetics be an effect, for instance? Could there be cultural sensitivities around methods of administration? So diversity across that entire workforce and pipeline through the life cycle, really through the science and through the product. So first I'll talk about some work we've been doing in the context of pediatric populations in our Office of Pediatric Therapeutics, which is within the Office of the Commissioner. It falls under a team that's led by our Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Hillary Marston. And then I'll talk about some work in our Office of Minority Health and Health Equity, where they have an exciting collaboration that's giving us some new data about older adults and clinical trial participation. So our Office of Pediatric Therapeutics really has a mission of advancing opportunity for development, for therapeutic development for children, and for advancing health equity in the context of children. It's not clicking for me. I promise I am pressing the button and I know how to do this. Oh, now it went too far. There we go. All right, here we go. So they have a broad mandate, as you can imagine, being the Office of Pediatric Therapeutics. So just to give you an idea of some of the things that they do and the expertise that they have. So we have a pediatric advisory committee led through this office that will discuss and ensure that we have the advice that we need around pediatric products. They support science and research. They do a lot of education and outreach, developing materials, and also interacting to educate people about doing clinical trials in children. They have a focus also on rare diseases and pediatric ethics and lots of international collaboration with their colleagues across the world. So you may not be able to see this very well. I can't see your screen. Oh, maybe it's okay. So this is a graph. You can also find it on our website. But what's interesting here is it shows the increase over time in pediatric label changes. So what this is the update to a label specifically to include information about safety, effectiveness, or dosing in children. Many of this represents new approvals, new FDA approvals for children. Some of them could be updated information about dosing. But what it really shows, I think in a very compelling way, is that with this increased focus around inclusion of children, the importance of including children, with some of the legislation in this space, such as the Pediatric Research Equities Act, we really have seen an increase then, not only in trials, but just in even thinking about how we can utilize existing data to try to understand how things translate to children. So we're seeing this increasing over time, and I think a lot of it is this work that's going on collectively in kind of the biomedical and public health communities. So with that, to continue trying to advance this work around pediatric clinical trials, we have a draft guidance that you can check out if you're interested. And essentially, what it does is to give information about and to describe the ethical framework for protecting children in clinical research and also steps for considering enrollment. So a key issue here being that children are a vulnerable population, they can't consent for themselves, so we need to make sure that there are measures in place that make things accessible, for instance, for their caregivers, and that people understand the reason, the benefits, and the science behind participation of children in these trials. So we outlined some things for conducting ethical studies in children. So as I mentioned, a major part of that is the consent, obviously, with children being a vulnerable population. So the consent document, parental permission, we have to ensure that it's balanced and that there's plain language so that it's understandable. And also, importantly, that there are, in a protocol, risk mitigation efforts specific to children and even additional oversight, again, with this being a vulnerable population. There are novel trial designs, obviously, that can be adapted for children too. But with all of this, the thing that's important, obviously we need therapies for children. There are some things we can extrapolate from adults, but increasingly there is a need for an opportunity for children to participate in these trials and to just understand more about their developmental biology so that we can leverage more non-clinical data or data from older children or adults, for instance. So the trend that we see in pediatrics, I just wanted to blow up for you and show kind of how it looks in neonates. So as you can imagine, neonates, we often have even less understanding than in children overall. The science is not as well understood, and their opportunity for clinical trial participation is not as great. However, we do see changes there as well over time. So just here, a total number of drug label changes for pediatric populations, label changes for neonates, we have 88, and this is from 1999 to 2023. Drugs studied in neonates a little bit lower because we actually, based on non-clinical data, sometimes, again, can update those labels so that something could be used in neonates, and then drugs indicated for neonates. So this is something that certainly can expand, but we are, over time, with this focus, with this interaction with the community, seeing an increase in neonate therapies and for children overall. So for neonatal development, as I mentioned, it has been slower moving. There are a lot of gaps still. So for instance, preterm delivery, there are lots of things that can impact the child, brain development, brain injury that can even result from preterm delivery, and there are not therapies existing for those things. So lots of opportunity for development in this space, but hopefully as we get more framework around participation of neonates in trials, we'll see more development there. And just some resources. So on our website, you can find draft guidances and other documents about clinical trials in children and neonates and considerations there. And you can also, find information for getting in touch with our office as well. So to transition quickly to older adults, I wanted to talk about some of the work in our Office of Minority Health and Health Equity, a study that they've done that's really hot off the press that I think is interesting and speaks to many of the things we've talked about, and they have some data around that. So our Office of Minority Health and Health Equity is within the Office of the Commissioner. They have a broad mandate to advance health equity across all of the areas where we work. They do a lot of collaborative research. They support research in hubs. They have a website. You can actually search through their hub to find information about work that we're doing or collaborating on in various spaces. So in green, different fields you can put in if you're interested in a specific population. You can look for that, and it'll show you all the work that we have ongoing there. So there's a recent study that basically looked at older adults with multiple morbidities and their thoughts and thinking around clinical trial participation, their perspectives on that. And so we collaborated on the study. The lead on the study is from UCSF, and it's on our website. You can find it there. So essentially, what they found was that there is an interest in participation, many of the things we know, especially when it's a physician that they trust who's involved in those types of things, but there is concern often about other medications they're taking. There's concern about, will there actually be an impact for me, or will there be potentially some detrimental health impact? Maybe I already have enough, more comorbidities than I'd like to have to manage, and so will there be something that now impacts my health adversely? Lots of things that they're concerned about in that space. So again, I think that's where communicating to people more about the science as well can help to give them more perspective and opportunity to process some of those concerns, but it's something for us to be sensitive to and recognize that we need to have answers to those things, and we need to have empathetic answers to those things as far as what the impact could be on an individual person. So in thinking about intersectionality, they did work in older Latino adults and also in older Asian adults, and I'll show you later. And there's a lot of overlap here as far as the thinking, the things I described for older adults. What they saw in their study here was that there especially was interest on family involvement in adult children playing a role in health decisions, and so those adult children being able to be engaged in the clinical study and decisions around that. So that is an important thing that maybe is not always considered, but opportunities for the family to engage there. And I think overall, a focus on, I mentioned that, culturally concordant materials and really approach to things. So knowing the communities, we heard about the importance, knowing the community, certainly, and through recognizing that, again, identifying things like family involvement being an important piece. And here they had very similar findings, the cultural concordance being important, also understanding of natural products and natural product medicine and what the considerations might be there, how that might impact the clinical trial, how that might interact with this experimental product that you're asking them to use. So thinking about the people, where they're coming from, their cultural experience, and really working from there. And again, I do think that there's a lot of value in engaging with people on the scientific front. They can understand it, and I think that it gives them a lot more foundation for really understanding the importance of doing this work. So with that, I think I've talked enough. We'll have, I guess, a discussion, but thanks for hanging out with me through that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mepis, for that enlightening conversation. And you talked about knowing the community and the importance of that. And I think that's been a theme across, all of our panelists. So before we start, can you speak how perhaps your community inspired you to become a scientist, inspire you to do the work that you do now at the FDA?
Yeah, so I've been at FDA since 2022. I came first as the chief scientist. I was promoted to principal deputy just 3 months ago. Before that,
Congratulations.
Thank you. Before that, I was a professor for 12 years at Johns Hopkins Medicine, a basic science professor running my own lab, doing many of the things we talked about on the pharmacology side, and as also chair of the pharmacology department there. So I really love using science to service people and service medicine, and the FDA is a unique opportunity to do that, a broader impact than I felt I could make in many other spaces, leveraging, applying that science to being able to work across a range of public health areas and try to make things better. For me, you asked about, my community coming along, I did not have there were not many scientists, or sometimes any, I would say, as a kid that I got to interact with in the communities that I belonged to. Right. So that, in a way, inspired me and pushed me to want to be different in that way and provide that. So, for instance, now I do a lot of work with kids. I go to schools and do science demonstrations because I want kids to know that a scientist. It's not just something way out there, or TV stereotyping us as strange people who can't interact with anyone. That someone, you were able to have a conversation with them, right. They cared about you. And it's something that you can do. So I think that's important. And so I just try to be, representation wherever I can be.
Oh, thank you so much. Inspiration. So I really appreciate you sharing your personal story. So at the National Health Council, we do play a key role in connecting patient organizations, like many of our audience today, to federal agencies where patient input is really needed. So can you describe how the FDA specifically engages age-specific population engagement. You talked a little bit about that, but can you elaborate a little bit more?
Yes, so one thing is we do a lot of interaction with patient communities, whether it's through, different organizations or just people who, reach out and have questions. We do listening sessions. I've done lots of meetings where we've met with, parents of children with certain diseases, and they're talking about their experiences. We also have public meetings. We've had them around, for instance, older adults and thinking about the pharmacology there. So we use all of those mechanisms to try to connect with various patient groups that we, intersect with and understand really firsthand from them their needs and concerns. So yeah, public meetings and things like that. And of course, we have our advisory committees as well. As I mentioned, the Pediatric Advisory Committee, where we get to hear from scientific experts in that space. Many of our advisory committees also do have, for instance, a patient representative perhaps who also lends a perspective. So we're always looking to hear from people, and we use various platforms to do that.
Thank you for that. And we understand, and specifically because of your talk today about how critical health equity is and diversity in clinical trials. So can you elaborate a bit more on health equity strategies that perhaps our audience can partake in or really think about as they're developing their own work plan on, I want to make sure that FDA knows this. So how do I build in my health equity program so that it could be impactful at a federal agency?
Yes, so one thing is our Office of Minority Health and Health Equity that I mentioned, they do have funding opportunities. So looking for those, applying for those, certainly. They have various consortiums they lead, looking for opportunities to join those. Certainly you can reach out and also just make them aware of your program and the work that you're doing. So that's really important. I think all the work that we can do in this space, it all can make a difference. And that a lot of it is thinking about the impact at that local level. And I think that has a broader impact, whether we're directly knowledgeable, whether we know about your program or not directly. I think that it can still have an impact, and the work is just so important.
Thank you so much. And I do welcome the audience members. We're going to have a couple of minutes for Q&A. So if you want to make yourself to the microphone, and if you have any questions for Dr. Wampus, also welcome you to do so. From your key remarks, what would you like our audience, and our audience is very broad here. We have researchers, we have policymakers, we have patient advocates, we have patients themselves. So what would you like the take-home message to be? That like after you leave this 2-day symposium where you learn about the lifespan, how critical it is to engage patients across these different demographics and age groups, but this is what I want you to take away with.
So a couple of things. From the FDA perspective, one thing that I always try to really impart upon people is that we are a scientific agency, that we do scientific work, we do scientific research, we are generating knowledge, and all of these areas where we work, we are working to advance. So I think that's one thing. People often think that we kind of passively just receive information, but we are knowledge builders, and we do want to try to advance these areas, and health equity is one that's really important to us. And so hopefully you got to see some of the initiatives. You can check out, the Office of Minority Health and Health Equity website and see more of their projects. So they're really groundbreaking. And there's other stuff going on across the agency. I highlighted kind of Office of the Commissioner work, but all of our product centers have a lot of health equity work too. And I think in addition, we can think broadly about that term, health equity. There's a new project from our Center of Devices that I'm really excited about. They recently announced it's home as a healthcare hub, where they're actually working with architects to try to think about how you can design the home in a way that works for patients as far as medical devices and things that they need. And I think that that's really exciting. So clinical trial diversity is one, and I talked about that, but there are lots of ways to advance health equity. And for FDA, it's across the span of the work we do. It's not just, I said drugs a lot, but as I mentioned, that's chemicals in food, that's, all of these things apply. So it's important for each of the areas we work, and that's one place, nutrition. There's a lot of opportunity, and nutrition impacts health equity. So thinking about it broadly is important, and we need the range of people, all these different backgrounds to do it. And I think the last thing I would say is, I do think there's a lot of, and I know I said several times, I think there's a lot of value in that scientific reason and expressing that to people. I think that it helps a lot. one thing that I've seen is some people can have hesitation about a certain therapy, for instance, because it sounds scary even. It sounds scary. What is that? Like, what is mRNA? Is that good for me?
Right.
And so understanding the science, the more that we can talk to people about that, I think that it allows people to feel more connected to the work and understand it, and more enthusiastic even about engaging in some way and being involved.
I think a couple of things that you just said now is the non-traditional side, engaging like other stakeholders into the process, right? And looking at not just from a drug perspective, but looking at other determinants of health, and also how we could relate to the community, get them engaged. So this really resonates a lot with the community. Do we have any? We have maybe about maybe a couple, 1 minute for a question, so please.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be able to ask this question. Thank you so much for the presentation. I am Sneha from Generation Patient, and I was formerly a pediatric patient, now a young adult patient. And one of the things that we have been really thinking about is this idea of who the young adult patient is. And I think traditionally we've seen our community as, 18 to 26, 18 to 30 looped in with like 60-year-olds, for example. So with the FDA adverse event reporting system, you know better than I do, it's 18 to 64 versus, CDC's vaccine adverse event reporting system is 18 to 29, or grouped by 10 years. So I'm just so curious to know if there's going to be any sort of efforts to have public access to subgroups or narrower subgroups within the 18 to 64 age range. And I know that, sorry, I just had one really quick comment, that oncology space also has, in my opinion, has led a lot of the AYA sort of work to distinguish young adults as a unique subgroup, but just would be so curious to hear your thoughts on that.
It's an important point, and I think, like you said, lots of innovative thinking in the oncology space, and our Oncology Center of Excellence at FDA has been really innovative and forward-leaning in many different aspects of health equity. I think it's something to consider. It is a bit dependent on the area we're thinking about as far as that impact, but from a health equity standpoint, it's definitely something that our health equity folks in Office of Minority Health and Health Equity are thinking about, especially with the engagement piece of things. It's going to be different in various age groups, and the approaches we need to take to engagement are going to be different. So that is something that's being discussed, and something that I think we're looking to collaborate with people and help move forward more awareness around that.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Bumpus. I know you have to go to another engagement, probably you're a busy person, but we really appreciate the time of you taken to share your knowledge with many of our patient advocates, patient organizations, and all of our membership at the National Council. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. So I have the honor to close us out. I know you've probably been hearing a lot from me over the last several days, so I apologize for that, but I swear, we're almost done. I'd like to first thank our sponsors for really contributing and helping support the 2024 Science of Patient Engagement Symposium. Without your support, we could not have done this. I also want to take the opportunity again to please give a round of applause to all of our patients, patient advocates, patient organizations in the room. Your work is tremendous, and this is what keeps us doing our work at the National Health Council. And I always tell Randy is that our mission is what keeps our commitment going and our drive to further our work with patients, and specifically for the patients with chronic diseases and disabilities, because definitely, that is at the core. And of course, centering health equity in all of our efforts. Thank you again for providing all that wonderful feedback during our working session. I apologize again that I made you work before lunch, but definitely all your feedback is going to be so helpful for us as we continue our work at the National Health Council. As we wrap up, I want to make sure that you all know that we do have a 2025 Science of Patient Engagement Symposium already in the works. Let me finish today before we start 2025, but it is already scheduled for May 7th and 8th, so if you would like to mark your calendars, please go ahead and do so. It would be here again at the National Press Club, so make sure you do that. Also, there is a QR code that's you can see on your screen. Again, your feedback is greatly appreciated and valuable, and it is because of all of your input that we're able to make this event a success. So please, please, please take the time. If not, we will also still keep emailing you to complete your evaluation. So whether you do it now or you do it at home, you will get one. So thank you so much for that. And again, just thank you. Hopefully you're able to connect, you're able to be energized, you're able to move, you're able to do all these wonderful things to your community, because at the end of the day, it's about our community, it's listening to the patients. Of course, throughout our theme about lifespan, we must continue engaging and learning, listening to pediatrics, or young adults, or adolescents, or adults, women's research, women's care, older populations, and of course, really also interacting with our federal agencies, who really also are those drivers of the top-down level policies and regulatory processes that impact our work every day. So wishing you again, for those who are moms, who have moms, who are remembering their moms, if they're not here with us, happy Mother's Day, and see you in 2025. Thank you.